Hello and welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show. This is the show that will not allow the elephants in the room to go unnoticed or the hard issues to be swept under the carpet, no matter how much politicians, the media and our elites want them to be. This week we look at the Queensland LNP's election commitment on human rights for the unborn. Could the trad abortion to birth laws be wound back? Gender-bending madness continues to be in the news, and what is happening with Queensland Labor's push for euthanasia? Has Anastasia Palaszczuk kicked the can down the road? All this and more in today's show. Thanks for joining me. But first up, it's great to see the Australian's Bernard Lane continuing to shine a light on Australia's secretive children's gender whisperers. He was again reporting on the issue this week, covering the views of a world-renowned expert on Asperger's syndrome. Professor Tony Attwood has warned that changing gender is not necessarily the answer for children suffering with this condition. It's been well known for years that children on the spectrum have disproportionately presented for gender treatment such as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and surgery. And disproportionate number of these have been girls wanting to become boys. Bernard Lane reports, quote, "In the country's busiest youth gender clinic at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, 45% of 383 patients, 275 of them born female with an average age of just 14, showed mild to severe autism features on a screening test," end quote. Professor Attwood went on to tell Bernard Lane, quote again, "Once they've changed gender, they still have autism, and when gender transition doesn't solve their problems, they think, oh no, that was the only option I had, what's the point of life?" End quote. Now, one of the characteristics of autism is what we call a one-track mind, and sometimes the issue of gender dysphoria, discomfort with one's body, and changing gender becomes a special interest with a phenomenal knowledge and determination. Now, Sky News commentator Peter Credlin continues to follow Lane's reporting and again interviewed him this week. It's worth watching their 7-minute conversation. The alarming thing about Lane's reporting is that gender clinics, which are treating children in epidemic numbers following years of safe school-style conditioning in the classroom, refuse to answer his questions. Lane wrote that, quote, "Australia's other large specialist clinic at the Queensland Children's Hospital would not comment on the autism issue and told a member of the public last year it no longer kept data on how many biological girls given puberty blocker drugs were autistic," end quote. And they're particularly cagey when asked whether or not they are performing surgery on children. Here's Lane again, quote, "On Monday, one of Australia's best-known gender-affirming surgeons and a popular choice on trans social media, Andrew Ives, was set to resume operations at a private hospital in Melbourne as elective procedures ramp up," end quote. Now, Ives did not reply when asked if under 18 patients were in the queue. A typical cost estimate for top surgery or a mastectomy is about $10,000. Under 18 trans surgery is thought to be rare in Australia, but public data is lacking. Now, as Lane told Peter Credlin, safe schools type material which teaches children their gender is fluid lives on in classrooms around the nation. Sadly, the Health Minister Greg Hunt, after lobbying from the powerful LGBTIQA+ lobby, has backed down on plans to hold an independent inquiry into treating children suffering from gender dysphoria. Well, stay with me, there's more to come. Well, it's no wonder the kids are confused. Our scientists can't even tell us the difference between a man and a woman. Now, you can't make this stuff up. When Australians agreed to change the definition of marriage, they probably didn't think a change to the definition of woman would follow. But rainbow politics is relentless. If you don't read The Australian or watch Sky News, you might have missed what I'm about to tell you. Like coronavirus, rainbow gender fluid theory has jumped from our safe schools to the once respected Australian Academy of Science, which inhabits Canberra's iconic Shine Dome at the Australian National University. The Academy has decreed that a woman is, quote, anyone who identifies as a woman, end quote. I kid you not. If you thought a woman had a vagina, breasts, and XX chromosomes, think again. Someone with a penis, normally referred to as a man, whose, quote, personal gender identity does not correspond with sex assigned at birth, end quote, can be a woman, our scientists now tell us. Apparently, we've been wrongly assigning babies their gender just because they were born with certain biological features. Confused? Well, it gets worse. This new definition of woman appears as part of the noble push to get more women into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, known as STEM. It is contained in the glossary on page 58 of the Academy's Women in STEM Decadal Plan. Now, it goes without saying that in today's PC fascist world, you are a bigot if you disagree. For the record, the glossary was silent on the definition of man. It's almost like the Women in STEM Decadal Plan is tailor-made for mediocre male scientists who might be looking for a career leg up by changing their gender identity. Heck, they wouldn't even have to have surgery or take estrogen. Like women and girls striving to compete with biological men under transgender guidelines released by our sports minister Richard Colbeck last year, women scientists seeking to get ahead in STEM now may also have to make way for biological males. As Bernard Lane from The Australian, who broke the story, pointed out, the Academy's president, John Shine, is using the current COVID-19 crisis to campaign for accurate science against, quote, made-up stuff, end quote. Seriously? He should look in his own backyard first. Now, evolutionary biologist Madeleine Beekman, a professor at the University of Sydney, said the Academy had departed from biological fact. She says, quote, I find it surprising that it comes from the Academy of Science, which should be based on science and not some social, political agenda. So, I'm shocked, actually. End quote. That's what she told The Australian. As Bernard Lane also pointed out, the Women in STEM Decadal Plan is paid for by the taxpayer. That's you and me, folks. Why the gender whisperers are running amok in our schools, sporting clubs, and in our scientific institutions on the watch of a Liberal and national government is mystifying. If courage does not exist to take on this foolish and harmful ideology now, when will it? LNP parliamentarians like Senator Amanda Stoker from Queensland are trying, but it is a measure of the power of the rainbow political lobby that so little progress is being made 7 years since the coalition was elected. Now, gender dysphoria is real, but so is anorexia. Both afflictions involve people thinking something about themselves that is not real. The last thing women need is for politicians, and now scientists, to buy into a world that is not real. Enjoying the show? That may not be the right phrase, but this information and analysis, if it's helpful, please subscribe or click like so you can hear more in the weeks ahead. Stick around, I'll be back. Welcome back, you're with the Lyle Shelton Show. one Queensland political party will move to wind back Jackie Trad's abortion to birth laws. The killing of unborn babies paid for by you, the taxpayer, through Medicare is undoubtedly one of the most vexed issues of our time. Sadly, it seems to have the support of most Australians. Whether that support is based on proper information is another matter. But it does seem that most people would rather avert their eyes than consider what their eyes see on an ultrasound screen. In the same way an unborn baby recoils at the initial probing of the abortionist's instrument, we recoil at informed debate. As a result, we have had decades of abortion on demand culminating in the practice being scrubbed from the criminal code in most states. Proper figures are not kept, but it is estimated that 80,000 Australian babies are aborted each year. There is no sanction in law for a man who coerces a woman to kill their baby, and there is no sanction for those who choose to kill a baby because they wanted a boy. Apart from the pro-life movement, which is ignored by the body politic and the media, no one seems to care. That's why a story which appeared in this week's Brisbane Times matters. An unnamed spokesman for the LNP said if it won government, it would, quote, review gestation limits, counselling arrangements and protections against abortion coercion, end quote. While this won't completely stop the killing, which sadly seems to be supported by a majority of Queenslanders, it will assist many women and will save many babies' lives. This is a progressive move by the LNP. The former Queensland Deputy Premier Jackie Trad in 2018 led the charge for abortion to birth legislation, with her aim being to ensure there were no limits for abortion, gestational or otherwise. Now, polling shows the majority of people are deeply uncomfortable with late-term abortions, something that did not bother Trad in her abortion enthusiasm. Reviewing counselling arrangements, where the only advice a woman often gets is from the organisation killing her baby, would be a big improvement. Criminalising men like rugby league stars Tim Simona and Bryce Cartwright for coercing their girlfriends to kill their babies would also be a win for women. The LNP's moves are testament to the work of good people within the party's various units and policy-making forums who have been willing to make a coherent argument and convince fellow party members that change is needed. It was great to see the Brisbane Times report, and I quote, "At last year's LNP State Convention, where party members come together to set policy direction, a resolution was passed calling for a future LNP government to legislate that babies born alive during a late abortion, i.e. post 20 weeks, be given the same protection under the law as any other newborn child," end quote. It's a measure of how debased our society has become that a motion like this was even needed. Sadly, there have been hundreds of cases of babies born alive and left to die after botched abortions in Queensland alone. It's one of the abortion industry's many dirty secrets. It's fantastic to see a major political party finally recognise this. Now, abortion enthusiasts like Trad, they fear open debate because they know support would melt if people knew the truth. If only mothers like Jaya Taki and Miss X knew they had other choices than to give into the bullying of the likes of Simona and Cartwright, if only. For progress on protecting women and unborn babies from the horrors of the abortion industry, your action, if you are a Queenslander, at the ballot box on October 31 is required. Finally this week, we turn to what advocates call voluntary assisted dying. Now, if euthanasia is not electoral poison, why is Anastasia Palaszczuk putting it into a coma until after the Queensland election? I've always thought that Palaszczuk was a reluctant conscript to the radical social agenda of the left of her Labor Party. After all, it was her former deputy Jackie Trad who drove the abortion to birth agenda, holding a party to celebrate baby killing at a swank West End bar 1 year after her legislation passed. Palaszczuk has done her best during this term of Parliament to put off one of the left's other prized social reforms, that is euthanasia. She's probably been helped by Trad's rolling interactions with the Crime and Corruption Commission, and more recently the COVID-19 crisis, which saw Parliament suspended. Palaszczuk has not declared whether or not she supports euthanasia, but it is one of the social issues that sadly seems to have a lot of public support. Even some in the LNP do, including former Premier Campbell Newman. Everyone fears dying, and more than that fear is a fear of a bad death. Almost everyone has a story of a loved one or a friend who has suffered. What is not widely known is that end-of-life healthcare has come a long way in the last 20 years. Palliative care experts have told Parliament's inquiry into the so-called voluntary assisted dying that requests for an early end of life dry up when people are given proper care. The inquiry found that end-of-life healthcare was badly underfunded, and logic would dictate that this be fixed before even considering a debate about making killing part of healthcare. But we live in an age where reason is out the window, trumped by emotions. There are a small number of cases that are difficult to treat with palliative care, but even then, palliative sedation is a pain-free option for the very worst and most difficult of cases. With properly funded palliative care, the overwhelming majority of people can expect a dignified and pain-free death surrounded by their loved ones. There is no reason to cross the Rubicon to where doctors suddenly become killers. Sadly, this is a discussion missing in much of the media's characterisation of this issue, and sadly the majority of politicians sitting on the cross-party inquiry leaned in favour of the lethal injection. They were obviously affected by the emotional stories they heard from the public and from euthanasia activists. Who can blame them? Except there is always an emotional reason to enact public policy. The trick is to make sure there are not unintended consequences, something impossible with euthanasia policy. The chief concerns with euthanasia legislation is how to stop the vulnerable from being wrongfully killed, something that has become routine in Holland and Belgium since they galloped through the ever-moving goalposts of euthanasia policy. Because these wrongful deaths occur on the elderly or deeply sick and estates and money are involved, often there's very little fuss made. To avoid euthanasia becoming too much of an election issue, Palaszczuk has kicked the can down the road, sending the issue off to the Queensland Law Reform Commission to come up with a draft bill. This, of course, won't happen until after the October 31 state election. Queenslanders should be very concerned about the ability of the Law Reform Commission to thread the needle of allowing for euthanasia for the terminally ill who are in intractable pain, a very tiny minority of patients, while preventing a suicide on demand regime, which is the real aim of leading euthanasia activists. After all, the Law Reform Commission were the geniuses who drafted Trad's abortion to birth law with no provision for pain relief to be administered to the unborn babies as they are torn limb from limb in their mother's womb, no provision to stop men coercing mothers into killing their child, and no provision to stop baby girls being targeted in sex selection kills. Everywhere euthanasia laws have been passed, the goalposts have moved. It is a slippery slope to euthanizing the mentally ill, as it has been in Holland and Belgium, and saving money in the health system, think Canada. At a time when our society has admirably made enormous sacrifices to make sure the old and the frail did not suffer premature death because of coronavirus, why would we even contemplate public policy which pressures them into that very thing? With Trad on the backbench and fighting to hold her Green left seat of South Brisbane, you can bet euthanasia will be back on the table after October 31. In the meantime, Palaszczuk hopes we all forget about the issue. But mark my words, this will be resuscitated after the election if Labor wins. Well, thanks for joining me today on The Lyle Shelton Show. Remember to subscribe and stay tuned for more in the near future. Bye for now.